been 5 months since I announced my creature collection game, Pico Pals. Through feedback on the first devlog and playtesting, I've refined the game's concept and homed in on a unique and coherent design for the game. While most of the game's world is yet to be visually designed and arranged, the majority of the development is complete and the core of the game is something special. In the announcement video, I emphasized how my game is differentiated from Pokemon, the most popular game in the genre by a large margin, in a variety of ways. What could be seen as criticisms of the Pokemon games were intended more so to highlight the open room for exploration in the genre that I haven't seen from any games yet. I enjoy games like Koromon, which followed the Pokemon formula closely, but that wasn't what I wanted to do with this game. Pico Pals is designed around bringing creature collecting and battling gameplay to the player in a tight, short, arcade-like package. All of the game's features are synergized to this theme, from its game mechanics to its visual identity. The most striking aspect of the arcadification of creature collection is the way art is handled. The uniformly square sprites are all restricted to 1 or 2 colors from a limited palette of 12 colors, 9 hues plus black, white, and gray. This is intended to be reminiscent of primitive computing, like that of the Pico 8, which is where Pico Pals derives its name. On top of that, the sprites have black backgrounds instead of transparency, making the background behind a given sprite completely covered. This works because of the consistent black background of the whole game, which is necessary for this palette. I intended to convey a retro vibe without resorting to pixel art, so the sprites, despite their simplicity, are high-resolution 4K vector graphics accompanied by scanline post-processing. There's also a bit of bloom and chromatic aberration for good measure. For this game, I settled on a somewhat arbitrary number of Pico Pals as a nice round 100. This is less than Pokemon's 151, but because Pico Pals don't evolve, this is actually about twice as many unique creatures. With such strict graphical limitations, it was difficult but satisfying to arrive at all of the finalized creature designs. I started out with the obvious designs that are based on real objects and animals, such as Flowey the flower and Wawel the duck. Others are based around visual shapes such as Pootybeat the heart and Diandot the diamond. Shape language and silhouette are important for such simple images, which can be seen in Baba the round blob as opposed to Kiki the sharp blob. I made a variety of designs, and because there are no types in Pico Pals, I didn't have to think about balancing or evenness. Above all, I wanted the Pico Pals to be cute, and the lack of a mouth on them adds to this. Again conforming to a retro style, the animation of the Pico Pals is limited to 2 frames, a normal sprite and an alternate sprite. There is a surprising amount you can do with just 2 images, from an alternating walking animation to a death state to a culling state. All of the animations, besides move animations, are handled by an animation manager class that performs a modulus operation on the game's time to create a constant 2-frame rhythm that all of the game objects conform to. A major undertaking for Pico Pals was creating all 100 creature call sound effects, but it was necessary to give every creature a distinct sound. A Pico Pal makes its call every time it is instantiated in battle, as well as when the player interacts with a wild Pico Pal. I have lots of experience making music, but sound effects not so much. I've gone away without having to make many sound effects in the games I've made so far, but that won't fly with Pico Pals. Every sound effect starts out with some sort of bass sound. Many of the sounds I started with I got from the stock asset site Pixabay, but I made sure to do lots of layering, reversing, stretching, and pitch shifting so the end product doesn't sound like a stock asset. I used Native Instruments Massive X Synth and the free program BFXR for synthesizer sounds. When applicable, I attempted to use my own voice for the sound effects to mix the results. The mouth is versatile and organic, which makes it great for creating creature sounds, but because I use my own voice in so many places, even with pitch shifting and EQ, some of the calls sound like me. Hiss, 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 hiss. To edit the bass sounds, I use many effects. I applied Tritix Crush Bit Crusher plugin to the master channel, so that all of the sounds will be filtered through a Retro Machine sound, which matches the visuals. Every track also requires reverb to sound embodied, and for that I use Native Instruments ROM, set to grounded and with the small room size. Delay also adds texture to sounds, and I use Valhalla Supermassive for that. In all of the music I have ever made, I have never had a reason to use ring modulation, but for the sound effects, it turns out to be invaluable. Ring modulation adds harmonic information that brings a sound effect to life. Another trick I utilized was to add a tremolo effect to a track, only to automate it to create a natural sounding vibrato that makes tracks sound more organic. The sprites and sound effects help to fill out the Picopedia, the in-game encyclopedia of all Picopals containing their name, appearance, call, stats, and description. In the original conception of the game, I planned for the Picopals to have no names, so as to force the player to come up with their own nicknames and bond with their Picopals. This idea sounded good on paper, but in effect, it resulted in players assigning random letters and quickly pressing the enter button on the virtual keyboard. I still want to encourage players to come up with their own nicknames for their Picopals, but now there is a default species name for those who are in a rush or just don't feel creative. This also means that trainers no longer nickname all of their Picopals, which is good for consistency and player awareness. Each Picopal entry also gets flavor text in the form of a short description. The descriptions are silly and add character to the game. For example, alphabetically the first Picopal is Antling, who is a ball with antlers. Its description is, large antlers prevent Antling from rolling around and has no legs to walk with. This description feeds off of the creature's design, while highlighting its fantastical aspect as a cartoon game object. I coded up a web version of the Picopedia, and will link it in the description, so go and check it out. The stats are placeholder, but all of the art, sounds, and text are done. Because Picopals is a short, streamlined, and arcadey game, the type system is radically different from Pokemon. The effectiveness grid of type effectiveness for 18 types is a barrier to entry for a quick game, so instead Picopals features a color-based type system where clockwise distance on the color wheel determines type effectiveness. This way, there is no memorization, and a new player can jump right in as long as they understand color. In the beginning of the game, the player inputs their favorite color, and there is a small damage boost for Picopals with a matching color. Trainers also have a favorite color, as seen in their colored sprites. When a player enters a new town on their journey, they are confronted with trainers of various colors with text over their heads displaying their level and the number of Picopals. This way, the player gets to choose who they battle first based on who they have an advantage over. Battles are broken up by the exploration game flavor, in which the player can search for wild Picopals in chests with battle items and key items. For every successful battle, the player gets a star which, if they get enough, allows them to break down star barriers in the overworld and progress to the next block of towns. A major feature that separates Picopals from other creature collectors and aligns the game with Nuzlockes is permadeath. When a Picopal dies in battle, they must be released from the party to make room for a new Picopal. There is only one wild Picopal for every species sprinkled through the game, so if the player runs out of wild Picopals in the sections of the map already unlocked, they lose the game. This way the player has a constant rotation of new Picopals rather than holding on to just a few, and if they have favorites, they must try extra hard to prevent their death. From the very beginning, I knew I wanted Picopals to be presented as a square screen to add to the bite-sized feel of the game. But over development, I realized that the extra monitor space was a waste of potential. Instead of literally rendering a square game window, the game can be rendered in a typical 16:9 ratio with black bars full of information on the sides. In particular, in battle, the sides of the screen are dedicated to the player on the left and the enemy trainer on the right, with all of their Picopals and their state displayed. This was inspired by the UI for Pokemon Showdown, which is far superior to playing the official games. The extra space is also an opportunity for adding visual depth to the player character in the form of a portrait of the player with their name and experience level. Lastly, in the bottom right corner, I added a color wheel. I hesitated to add this at first because, as an artist, I enjoyed the experience of using my mental color wheel to determine type effectiveness and strategy. But I realized that although the color wheel isn't arbitrary in structure, it is arbitrary which way is considered to be clockwise. I have an internalized mental color wheel that looks a certain way, yellow at the top like the sun, with green being the next clockwise color, but this isn't standardized at all. To make the wheel more dynamic, the size of the colored dots change based on the proximity of the player to trainers. As the player approaches a cyan trainer, the cyan dot on the color wheel grows. And if the player is fighting a cyan Picopal in battle, the cyan dot grows. Commenters on the previous devlog pointed out how my game is not colorblind accessible, but hopefully this aids in that problem at least a little bit. Game developers should strive for accessibility when possible, but the core game concept of Pico Pals is based around color hues, and that can't change without changing the whole game's identity. So far, I have 9 songs in the works for Pico Pals. There are 2 unique songs for every section of the overworld, one for exploration and one for battling. The songs I made give the game an electronic pulse, especially because of the extensive use of synthesizers. The leads are done in Massive X, the bass is done in Super 8, and the drums in Super Audio Kart. The analog sounds extend the retro aesthetic to the audio. Compositionally, the music is based on the NES, with 2 lead tracks, a bass track, and a noisy drum track. There's a lot of linear drumming and monophonic melodies. That's all the progress I have to report for now. Development has been smooth, and I expect Pico Pals to come together in a final product in no time. The Steam page is linked in the description, so give it a wishlist if you're interested. I'm always open to feedback, so comment if you have any. This has been Ryan9, thank you for watching.